Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my final verdict on the new Canon RF 35mm F1.8. This is a macro IS STM lens. Now, this represents the smallest, lightest option and least expensive option that is available on Canon's new RF mount for the EOS R cameras. And that makes it a very important lens because if you look at what Canon has released to this point, the average price of the 4 lenses that are released and then a 5th that has been announced for soon release, the RF 85mm F1.2L, the average price of those lenses comes out to right under $2,000. And if you remove this lens at $499 out of the equation, leaving the other 4 lenses, the average price is closer to $2,200. That means that the average price of those lenses is more expensive than either one of the camera bodies available for the system at this point. So I think this lens is important, particularly if you are purchasing a Canon EOS RP. So if you're spending $1,300 on a camera, you're probably not looking to spend over $2,000 on a lens. And so lenses like this are obviously very important to the system itself. And I actually reviewed it on an EOS RP because I thought it was a natural pairing for the smallest, lightest, cheapest camera option as well. And so this is designated as a macro lens. However, it is a 0.50 times magnification or a 1 to 2 times macro ratio. There is some debate as to whether or not a 1 to 2 ratio lens constitutes a true macro lens. I can tell you, however, that I have reviewed many lenses with a similar designation, which all called themselves macro lenses as well. But of course, having macro capability in an image stabilized 35mm focal length makes this an extremely versatile and useful lens. But is it a good lens? Let's jump in and find out. Now, in my first look episode, which I also did a combination image quality breakdown, so if you want more information on either of those things, I would recommend that you look at that. But that leads me to my first point. This is the only non-L designated lens as a part of the RF lineup. And so unfortunately, Canon seems like they're going to persist in some of their non-L tendencies. And so to highlight that, this lens does not come with a lens hood. And so that's an additional $42 if you want to purchase a lens hood. It doesn't come with a pouch of any kind. It does not have any kind of weather sealing. Now, when Canon launched, kind of the division with the EF lenses, between L luxury series and non-L lenses, their consumer grade lenses, maybe at that point that made more sense. In the current market, however, it really makes no sense at all. I mean, outside of Canon and perhaps Nikon, I'm not really aware of any lenses that I review that don't come with a lens hood. And so that seems extraordinarily foolish to not include that at this point in what is a much more competitive market with a lot of different lens manufacturers that are making very good lenses. Beyond that, I've seen weather sealing, at least to some degree, put into lenses with a price tag as low as $200 or less. And so, in some kind of pouch included. Furthermore, I mean, if you're talking about packaging, seriously, this is the way that the lens comes. Inside the box, it's got a little place a little sleeve where you put it in the bubble wrap, and it's layered up like that and popped in the box. You can't put that as anything other than an F grade when it comes to presentation. So, I do have to say that, it has nothing to do with the quality of the lens itself, but I think that Canon needs to realize it is competing in a different market, and the mirrorless market is full of lenses that have very nice presentation and very nice build quality. You talk about even like Fuji lenses, a lot of which are less expensive than this, that have a much higher grade of build and presentation and even weather sealing. And so I think that Canon needs to recognize the market has changed. So rant aside, moving on. This has, Canon's consumer grade build, and so it is engineered plastics. It has a metal lens mount. It's kind of a matte type finish, and so physically it looks like fairly similar to Canon's 50mm f1.8 STM lens. It's set apart from that lens by 2 things. First of all of the RF lenses have a bit of a like a platinum accent ring here, kind of in the molded area. That is a, it's a slightly more elegant touch, and it marries up very nicely with a similar receptacle on the actual camera bodies. More significant, however, is that RF lenses, that are enabled by the additional pins in the RF mount that gives Canon more versatility to do a lot of different things. But one of those things is that on all of the RF mounts, they are including the control ring, which is a genuinely innovative and useful feature. It can be programmed within the camera to aid with a variety of different functions. My favorites that I've used it like a manual aperture ring, which is very useful for that. That's kind of an ergonomic control that I enjoy having as an option. So to quickly control aperture that way. I have also used it for exposure compensation, and of course there's other values you can apply to it as well. And so useful, and that's certainly what I would consider the strength of the lens itself. The lens has a relatively minor but common 52mm front filter thread that is obviously significantly less wide than the actual diameter of the lens. Now that leads us to some of the image quality observations. And so again, I would recommend that you look at the image quality segment if you want more information. I saved till last highlighting that front filter thread size because that, to me, may be part of the reason why one of the first optical things that jumped out to me is the amount of vignette that this lens has at wide apertures. It's over 3 stops in the corner, which is a heavy amount of vignette, and I also found that it extended very far into the frame. As a byproduct of that, it is some work to clean up the vignette on the lens, and vignettes as heavily as any 35mm lens that I have ever seen, I think. Beyond that, its light transmission is not as good. It was noticeably different in some of the lens comparisons that I did, about a 1/3 stop to somewhere between that and a 1/2 stop behind competing lenses. And so that's a bit of a downside to me, that light transmission is not as good as what it could be. So there's also some observable barrel distortion, enough so that even if you're shooting at portrait distances, like in this shot, where there are straight lines behind, you can see some bulge in those lines. And so that obviously will affect, some types of macro photography. On that note, just the nature of a 35mm focal length, you do have to be careful in how you approach shooting close focus distances with some subjects, because just the nature of a wider focal length means that you can get a little bit more perspective distortion, where things that are closer to the camera are emphasized, not in a balanced kind of way. And so just something to watch out on that front. The lens is very sharp. That's certainly a strength of the lens. It has very good sharpness in center of the frame, along the edges of the frame, stopped down a bit. It is razor sharp across the whole frame. And while I compared it, one of the lenses I had on hand that was, at 35mm focal length and Canon mount was the Canon 35mm F1.4L Mark II. Which obviously is a much more expensive lens, but I own it and I have it as a comparison point. So what I found is that the Canon showed a little, or the 35L I should say, showed a little bit more contrast and a little bit more resolution at wide apertures at kind of normal focus distances. And that's only at about f1.8 through f2. By f2.8, everything is about equalized out. What I did note as a positive for this lens is that it has a flatter plane of focus, and so if you're shooting at closer focus distances, it's much sharper in the corners just due to the focal plane compared to the 35L2. There's certainly a strength for that. Beyond that, I found that another strength is that it has a really beautiful sunburst effect. There's 9 rounded aperture blades, but just the nature of the aperture iris when it's stopped down, it has a standout sunburst effect, I would say. The bokeh quality is a bit of a mixed bag, and it really depends on the ratio of the camera to the subject to the background. And so if the subject is closer to the camera, the backgrounds melt away really nicely, nice bokeh quality. If the subject's a little bit further away, however, or the background is a little bit closer, there's more in the transition zone, I found that the bokeh could get a little bit busy for my taste. And, certainly comparing it to, better bokeh lenses, there was obviously more hard edges grabbed, a little bit more contrast in the defocus area. So I don't consider this to be this lens to be a bokeh monster, a bokeh standout when it comes to that. Now, I promised in this final episode to deal with the autofocus. So this has a stepping motor, that's what STM stands for, which is a focus technology that Canon pioneered about the time when live view, and in particular having automatic continual AF during video, became a thing for Canon in live view. And so STM is a technology that works, better with that because it emphasizes smooth transitions from point A to point B. And so not as abrupt, less kind of pulsing that what the faster USM motors have. Now, when it comes to the mirrorless space, obviously STM translates into mirrorless, but it is not Canon's premium mirrorless autofocus technology. And that is reserved for their Nano USM, which is on the L series lenses, which is faster, quieter, and smoother. And so this is it's the more budget focus option. So good news is that the focus in most situations is quite fast. It's a little bit louder than what I would have expected. Not to say that it's loud in an absolute sense, but there is some focus noise, certainly in some situations. I also found that when I do a lot of product photography, as obviously I do lots of reviews of things, and I shoot product photography as a part of my process, for highlighting different aspects. And so I threw it into my workflow just to kind of see how it did in that application, since it is a macro designated lens. And I did find that in some situations at macro distances, if I didn't have a really precise contrast edge, the lens would do a little bit of hunting, more so than what I'm accustomed to under that same kind of circumstance. On the flip side, maybe surprisingly, while I was testing for low light performance, I shot in what was essentially a dark room. It was ISO 40,000 and only a 1/20th of a second shutter speed. Just to give you perspective, if I was shooting at ISO 100, it would have required something like a 40-second exposure. That's how dark it was in the room. But I was surprised that focus locked on to, again, an area with good contrast, but locked on fairly quickly and very, very accurately in near dark conditions. So that was a plus. When it comes to video, it really kind of depends on the focus system used in the camera. So if you're on the EOS R, whether you're in 4K or full HD, I think you're going to find just fine focus because it uses Canon's DPAF technology for that. And so again, focus pulls are maybe a hair slower and a hair less smooth than what it is with Nano USM, but does a pretty good job. Now on the EOS RP, that's going to depend on whether you're shooting in the 4K or the 1080 full HD mode. In 4K, it reverts to contrast AF, an inferior focus system. It doesn't have DPAF at 4K. In the RP, and so and frankly that focus is garbage. Particularly if you're trying to actually move around and track any kind of actions, it's just constantly going in and out of focus, even in mild conditions. Not a great experience. It's much better under the DPAF or full HD. And so if you're going to shoot RP and you want good video AF, you probably need to shoot at full HD, not at 4K. But works fine for that. Focus pulls are fine, not the best that I've seen, but not bad either. And so the focus system gets the job done, but it's not spectacular. Fortunately, the image stabilizer is better. It functions quiet, functions smooth. It's rated up to, up to 4.5 stops, and so very, very effective. It's good even at close focus distances. Just note that there are practical limitations when you're shooting handheld macro. It gets the job done, but you do have to use good technique to get effective results under that circumstance. At the end of the day, the biggest strength here is the fact that it is the nature of the lens itself. It's affordable, 35mm focal length. I consider it to be one of the most versatile, best focal lengths out there. So its close focus abilities, its image stabilization, which obviously is very important because to this point Canon has elected to not include in-body image stabilization. And so there's only a couple of lenses available in the RF mount that are image stabilized. And so if you want to shoot handheld video, obviously that's important for that. And so it's got a lot of versatility that's baked into it. And so it's a functional lens. It can be a workhorse lens. However, I would not consider it an exceptional lens when it comes to the rendering, that it produces images that you'll like, but maybe you won't love, if you can understand that distinction. And that's the way that I felt about it myself. If you look in the description down below, I have a a full written review that gives you even more information if you want to take a look at that. There's also an image gallery. You can look at photos for yourself, make your own determinations. There's also buying links if you would like to purchase one. And beyond that, there are the typical links where you can follow me on social media, including now on Instagram. You can sign up for my newsletter or become a patron and get sneak previews of upcoming content. And of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Thanks for watching. Have a great day.